Paul comes and he gives a new definition for sinners. And we're going to see this in Galatians 2 verse 17 to 18. And this is actually a very shocking thing in the light of the previous verses that we have read. We've read in Galatians 2 verse 15, it says here, we who are Jews by nature and not sinners of the Gentiles. So what it's basically saying is that under the law, the Gentiles were seen as sinners. Why? Because they were not part of the covenant. They were those who were not partaking. The word sinner means not to partake in, not to be a sharer in, or to be weak. So he comes and he basically says that according to the law, the Gentiles are those who are not a partaker of the promises of God, is not a partaker of the covenant, is not a partaker of salvation. And that's what the Jews believed back then. Then they wanted to make some of these Christian believers Jews quickly so they could be partakers of salvation. And then Paul says, well, you know what I've said in the previous message there, which I don't want to repeat myself. He says that is basically useless. But now he comes and he redefines what a sinner is. And we're going to read this from Galatians 2 verse 17 and 18. He says, but if while we seek to be justified by Christ, we ourselves are found sinners, is therefore Christ the minister of sin? God forbid. For if I build again the things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor. My goodness, this is absolutely amazing. He's just turned the thing around. What he's just done is actually declaring to all of those people. He comes and remember, this is part of his speech now, where he is correcting Peter. He says to Peter, Peter, you live after the manner of Gentiles. You've just eaten food with us here, as well as some of the other Jews. This, he said, in front of the big shot Jews that came from Jerusalem. And then he says to them that we Jews, we know that we couldn't be saved by our works. But now he comes and he says something so profound, and he writes this in the letter to the Galatians, so the Galatians can know who the true sinners are. Because what was taught was, you are a sinner if you're a Gentile, and the only way you cannot be a sinner is if you are circumcised. But Paul has changed this whole thing around. And what he's saying in this passage here is, he's basically saying that those who fall back to Judaism, they are the sinners. They are the transgressors. They're transgressing the law of life. They're transgressing the command of the Lord to believe upon Him. And they are now seen as sinners or not sharers in the covenant that God has made in Jesus Christ, or the salvation made available. I want to read that passage again. Galatians 2 verse 17 and 18. But if while we seek to be justified by Christ, so he's talking about the Jews here, while we seek justification by Christ, we ourselves also are found sinners. Is therefore Christ the minister of sin? God forbid. Now, listen to verse 18, bringing the context. For if I build again the things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor. So what is he saying? He says, well, if we who seek justification by Christ, he's talking to the Jews, he's talking to Peter, all of you that sit here, that's saying to the Gentiles they must be circumcised, you are seeking justification by Christ. As Jews, you are not seeking justification by the circumcision or the customs of Moses. Although you follow all these things, you are saying, no, our salvation is from the Messiah. We are seeking the Messiah to justify us. We rely upon His faithfulness. That's what we rely on. But now he says here that if you that are believing like that are found a sinner, doesn't mean that it's now okay with God and that what you are now believing is true. No. Now he defines sinner here. Sinner is not defining smoking, drinking, or sleeping around. He's defining sinner here as someone who builds again the things which he has destroyed. Referring back to the conference they had in Acts 15, he says, guys, when I was up with you in Jerusalem, we all sat together and we destroyed this thing of circumcision. We destroyed this thing of the customs of Moses. We said it is over, it is gone, it is not needed. We believed in the same gospel. You added nothing to me. I explained to you what I believe about the Jews, and you wonderfully agreed. You gave the right hand of fellowship, and we destroyed this old system. Now, if you guys come here and you are now preaching the old things which we have destroyed, you are making yourself sinners and transgressors. Putting them now, saying to them, you guys who are going back to the old Judaism way, you are, if you actually take the old measuring reed of Jew and Gentile, and you would say a Gentile is a sinner, you're making of yourselves Gentiles. You're making of yourselves transgressors, sinners, not qualifying, not part of the inheritance, not being justified by the works of God, outsiders in outer darkness in need of light. That is what he's saying to them. I tell you, I promise you, they were upset with Paul. They didn't like what he was saying, but he stood up to their faces and he said to them, listen guys, you are making yourselves transgressors. Let me read it again. For if we build again the things which I destroyed, for if I build again the things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor. So he's saying, you guys are building again the things which you have destroyed. And if I must go back into doing what you guys are doing, following after you, I am a transgressor. And I make myself a sinner, a transgressor. I'm a transgressor. I'm a sinner. I'm missing out on this. I'm not partaking of life. And this is what he writes to the church in Galatia, and he explains to them what he told the big shots that's basically now also bringing a misleading to the people in Galatia. And he is now indirectly saying to the church in Galatia, listen, should you follow after these false doctrines, you would make yourself transgressors. You would put yourselves in a place where you are now found a sinner, not partaking in, not sharing in, falling from the grace of God. Now, that is Galatians 2, verse 17 and 18.